The chamber was packed, news cameras flickered, aides whispered into phones, and the hum of anticipation thickened the air like static before a storm. Senator Cruzwell sat at the center of the horseshoe desk, his jaw tight, a sharp glint in his eyes that signaled not curiosity but combat. Across from him, Secretary Butridge adjusted his tie with composed precision, the faintest smile on his lips. It wasn't arrogance, it was strategy. Both men knew this wasn't a hearing, it was an arena. The chair's gavel struck once, echoing like a countdown. Secretary Butridge, the floor recognizes Senator Cruzwell. Cruzwell leaned forward. Mr. Secretary. He began, voice low but slicing. The American people are not here for platitudes. They want answers. Billions in taxpayer funds have vanished into so-called infrastructure modernization, yet half the states report zero improvement. Where did the money go? Butridge's gaze didn't flinch. Senator, the funds were distributed through transparent channels, approved by this very body. Progress takes time, and your state has received, spare me the statistics. Cruzwell cut in, his voice rising. Your progress has built bike lanes no one uses while bridges crumble beneath 18-wheelers carrying American goods. You've built Instagram backdrops, not infrastructure. Gasps rippled across the room, cameras clicked, reporters scribbled feverishly. Butridge straightened his posture, then replied, his tone cool and deliberate. Senator, I understand outrage plays well on television, but the truth is your office rejected multiple federal proposals that would have repaired those bridges. Perhaps you should ask your donors why. The silence that followed was surgical. Even Cruzwell blinked once, processing the blow. He leaned back slowly, a grin flickering at the edge of his mouth, the kind that said, "You've just drawn blood, and now I'm interested." "Clever," Cruzwell said, voice now quieter, almost conversational. "You deflect accountability with accusation, but let's talk about leadership. You've been photographed at half a dozen ribbon cuttings, but when airports collapsed into chaos, you were on vacation. Do you lead from a podium, Secretary, or from a postcard?" The crowd murmured again. Butridge exhaled. "Senator, leadership means trusting capable teams. When crises happen, you don't run toward the cameras. You fix the system. And if you want to talk about absence, perhaps you should check your own attendance record on the Transportation Committee." Cruzwell's smirk evaporated. His eyes hardened. "Don't confuse committee strategy with neglect. Some of us still believe in oversight before photo ops." A brief pause. Then, with deliberate calm, Butridge replied, "Oversight, Senator, is one thing. Obstruction is another. You've voted against every major transportation bill this administration proposed, then turned around and blamed us for lack of results. If this were a trial, the jury would call that bad faith." A few aides exchanged glances. Even the chair looked uneasy. The tension was a living thing now, pacing between the two men, feeding off each barb. Cruzwell clasped his hands together. "So you're saying, Secretary, that the chaos on the nation's roads, the gridlock in our ports, the shortages hitting small towns, are all my fault?" "I'm saying," Butridge countered, "that it's a shared failure. But the difference is, some of us are trying to fix it, and some of us are trying to weaponize it." The words hung there, blunt, heavy, deliberate. Cruzwell leaned in, voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "You think you can shame me with moral theater? The voters back home don't care about your virtue lectures. They care that their highways are potholes and their gas is unaffordable." Butridge's tone softened, but his stare did not. "And they might also care that you voted against every clean energy measure that could have lowered those costs. You can't campaign on fires you helped start, Senator." The room broke into a faint, shocked murmur, part disbelief, part admiration. Cruzwell, unshaken, glanced at the cameras, then back at his opponent. "That's rich," he said slowly, "coming from a man whose department can't even get a train to run on time. You speak of clean energy, yet half your initiatives burn through funds faster than diesel." Butridge smiled faintly. "At least we're building, you're just tweeting." That line landed like a hammer. A few aides behind Butridge tried, and failed, to hide their grins. Even the chairman's gavel didn't immediately silence the murmurs. "Gentlemen," the chair warned, "this is a hearing, not a campaign stage." But neither man moved. Both stared each other down, locked in silent defiance. Cruzwell finally spoke again, measured but fierce. "You've turned this into a media circus, Secretary. But remember, I've seen a dozen like you, slick, smiling, selling progress while America decays behind you. You'll have your headlines today, but when the next bridge collapses, don't expect applause." Butridge met his gaze. "And when that bridge is rebuilt, Senator, I'll be there with the workers. You can send a tweet." That drew a mix of laughter and groans from the gallery. Cruzwell didn't blink. He simply rose from his chair, collected his papers, and leaned into the microphone one last time. "Enjoy your soundbite," he said coldly, "but don't mistake applause for respect." He walked out, cameras chasing him, aides scrambling to keep up. Butridge stayed seated, hands folded, eyes following his rival. For a moment, just a flicker, there was no smugness, only fatigue. He exhaled slowly, whispered something inaudible to an aide, and stared down at the empty seat across the table. Outside, reporters swarmed Cruzwell, shouting questions. "Senator, do you think he dodged accountability?" He paused at the marble steps, looked straight into the camera, and replied, "No one dodges forever." Then he turned away, vanishing into the tide of flashing bulbs and roaring questions. Inside, Butridge finally rose. The chair sighed, struck the gavel once, and said, "This hearing will recess until tomorrow." Butridge walked out quietly. The chamber emptied, except for the echoes of words, sharp as glass, hanging in the air long after both men had gone. Morning hit Washington like a thunderclap. Headlines screamed from every screen, Cruzwell vs. Butridge, hearing erupts into chaos. Cable networks looped the confrontation on repeat, each side splicing the clips to feed their own story. In the marble halls of the Capitol, aides hustled past reporters, clutching coffee and crisis talking points. Senator Cruzwell's office was a war room. Phones rang without pause. Aides barked updates across the room, polling spikes, donor calls, threats of censure from committee chairs. Cruzwell stood by the window, watching the Potomac shimmer in the gray morning light. "They think yesterday was the fight," he said quietly. It was just the spark. His chief of staff, Lena Price, glanced up from a tablet. "You've got 3 minutes before your live on Capitol now. They want your reaction." Cruzwell smirked. "Reaction? No. They'll get a reminder." He turned toward the mirror, adjusted his tie, and lowered his voice. "He drew blood yesterday, Lena. Today we make him bleed policy." Across town, at the Department of Transportation, Secretary Butridge's morning was equally brutal. His communications director played footage of Cruzwell's latest sound bite on mute while headlines rolled underneath. Grandstanding or accountability. Butridge rubbed his temples. "He's not after reform," he said. "He's after a viral clip." The director hesitated. "Then give him one he regrets." Butridge looked up slowly. "No, we give him substance. The public's tired of shouting. They want results." He gathered his papers and walked out toward the waiting convoy. Outside, cameras flashed. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Secretary, will you apologize to Senator Cruzwell for calling him obstructionist?" He stopped just long enough to let the silence stretch, then replied, calm but pointed, "I won't apologize for defending American workers." The clip went viral within minutes. By noon, both men were scheduled to reconvene before the same committee. An emergency session called after overnight leaks revealed conflicting budget reports from the Transportation Department. The air inside the hearing room was thicker than before, every seat filled, every lens trained forward. The chair's gavel struck. We resume our inquiry into the Infrastructure Oversight Program. Senator Cruzwell, you have the floor. Cruzwell rose, papers in hand, voice sharpened to a blade. Mr. Secretary, overnight documents show that your department funneled $48 million into private consulting firms that, conveniently, hosted fundraising events for your party. Care to explain the coincidence? The gallery murmured. Butridge didn't flinch. Senator, every contract followed federal procurement law. If you read beyond the headlines, I read the invoices. Cruzwell interrupted, slapping the stack onto the desk. And I see waste, negligence, and political payback. Butridge leaned forward, his tone steel. And I see a senator weaponizing paperwork for theater. Those firms provided essential oversight during post-disaster recovery. Unless you'd prefer potholes over audits. Cruzwell's jaw tightened. Don't trivialize corruption as oversight. Butridge shot back. And don't disguise obstruction as patriotism. The exchange detonated like gunfire. The chair pounded the gavel, shouting for order. Reporters scribbled furiously, knowing every sentence would explode across networks before sunset. Cruzwell paused, inhaling sharply. Then, lowering his voice to a cold, deliberate cadence, he said, Mr. Secretary, you've built a department on optics, press tours, hashtags, ribbon, cuttings. Meanwhile, truckers in my state are driving across bridges held together by prayer. You owe them more than slogans. Butridge's answer was quieter, but each word hit like a drumbeat. And you owe them more than political stunts. You voted against the bill that would have fixed those bridges. You can't light the fuse and then blame the smoke. A collective murmur swept through the room. Even Cruzwell's staff looked uneasy. Cruzwell forced a smile. So now, accountability is a stunt. Only when it's selective. Butridge replied. You talk about crumbling roads, yet you cut funding for inspection programs 2 years ago. You talk about waste, yet you pushed subsidies for private contractors that padded campaign pockets. Math doesn't lie, Senator. It's written in asphalt. For a moment, Cruzwell said nothing. The cameras zoomed closer, hunting for cracks in his expression. Then, slowly, he began to clap. 1, 2, 3 measured strikes that echoed through the chamber, well rehearsed. He said, voice dripping with irony, But you can't audit integrity, Mr. Secretary, and that's what this administration has lost. He turned toward the chair. I move to subpoena all internal communications related to these contracts. The room erupted, half the committee applauding, half shouting protests. The chair struggled to restore order. Butridge leaned back, exhaling. If that's the road you want, Senator, we'll walk it. But remember, subpoenas work both ways. Cruzwell's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat, a reminder? Butridge said calmly, truth isn't partisan, even if your outrage is. The tension broke only when the chair slammed the gavel again. This hearing is recessed until 4 p.m. Both parties will provide the requested documentation. As the chamber emptied, aides on both sides swarmed their principals with phones buzzing, poll numbers, headlines, reactions flooding in. Outside the building, rain began to fall, streaking the reporters' lenses as they shouted over one another. Senator, did the secretary just threaten you? Mr. Secretary, is the senator under investigation? And neither answered. Cruzwell strode into his car, staring out the window as droplets raced down the glass. Beside him, Lena Price whispered, Sir, Your approval ratings are up 8 points since yesterday." He didn't smile, and his, up 10. Cruzwell looked away. Then this war's just getting started. Across the city, Butridge watched the same numbers from his office. His deputy said softly, "They're calling it a dead heat." Butridge closed his tablet. "There's no tie in truth, only timing." Outside, lightning flashed, splitting the clouds above the Capitol. For a brief second, the dome glowed like the center of the storm. Rain hammered the city as if the sky itself wanted to drown the noise. By dawn, both offices were on fire, figuratively. Overnight leaks had hit the networks, internal emails, whistleblower testimony, and one phrase that flashed across every banner: infrastructure funds redirected under political pressure. Senator Cruzwell didn't sleep. He'd been awake since 3 a.m., reading through the documents, red lines carved across pages in his own hand. His aide Lena entered, eyes red from exhaustion. "Sir, this is everywhere. They're saying you leaked it." Cruzwell looked up slowly. "Then it's working, she repeated, incredulous. "They're calling for an ethics probe." He turned toward the window, where lightning painted the Capitol in fractured light. "Lena, when the system hides rot, sunlight looks like an attack. Let them probe, we've got bigger moves." Across the city, Secretary Butridge faced his own firestorm. His deputy slammed a folder onto the table. "Sir, the whistleblower claims our oversight board flagged the contracts months ago. They're saying you buried the report." Butridge pinched the bridge of his nose. "I never buried anything. We delayed the release pending verification. Perception says otherwise." The deputy shot back. "The senator's people are framing this as deliberate concealment." Butridge straightened. "Then perception needs correction." He grabbed his coat. "Call the networks. I'm not hiding behind statements." By noon, both men were live on rival channels. Split screens divided the nation. Cruzwell's studio bathed in bold reds and blues, Butridge's in calm gray. Each spoke to their side of the storm. Cruzwell leaned toward the camera, voice firm but edged. "The American people deserve accountability. If this administration can redirect millions without oversight, then no bridge, no school, no hospital is safe from political games. This isn't about partisanship, it's about power." Meanwhile, Butridge's tone was cooler, surgical. "Let's be clear. The allegations stem from incomplete documents and an anonymous source. The senator's narrative depends on chaos, not truth. We're rebuilding a nation, and that work doesn't pause." For theatrics, both clips hit social media before their interviews even ended. Hashtags erupted: #Cruzwell exposed, #Butridge lies, #truth under oath. Commentators devoured every frame. By evening, the Senate Ethics Committee called an emergency hearing televised live. Cameras swept over the crowded chamber. The air hummed with anticipation. Cruzwell entered first, flanked by aides. He moved like a man walking into destiny. Butridge arrived moments later, his expression unreadable. The chair struck the gavel. "This committee is convened to address the allegations arising from yesterday's disclosures." Cruzwell spoke first. "Madam Chair, I move to subpoena the full internal correspondence from the Department of Transportation's Procurement Division. The people have a right to transparency." Butridge countered immediately, "And I request equal access to the senator's communications with private contractors lobbying for those same funds. Transparency should cut both ways." The room buzzed, the chair's voice strained for calm. "Both requests will be considered." Butridge turned toward Cruzwell, eyes sharp. "You're burning the house down to prove there's smoke." Cruzwell didn't blink. "And you're selling tickets at the door." The audience gasped. Butridge leaned forward, lowering his tone. "You think this is about headlines? I've spent my career trying to rebuild what cynicism destroyed. Every dollar, every mile of track, every bridge. Checked, audited, defended. You don't know weight of that. Cruzwell fired back. I know the weight of betrayal. You promised accountability. Instead, we got consultants, cocktail parties, and cover stories. You turned a public office into a PR firm. The chair's gavel cracked again, order. But the words barely mattered anymore. Both men were past the point of retreat. Cruzwell pointed to the stack of leaked documents on the table. Right here, emails showing your team delayed audits before midterms to protect optics. That's not leadership, that's manipulation. Butridge snapped, and yet your signatures on the same committee memos approving those audits. If I'm guilty, Senator, so are you. The room fell silent. Cameras zoomed in. For the first time, Cruzwell hesitated. That memo of Butridge cut in, voice steady, was signed by your staff. Maybe you should read your own paperwork before casting stones. A tense silence expanded like a fault line. Even the chair froze. Cruzwell regained his footing, his voice rising. This isn't over, Secretary. One of us is lying, and America will know which. Butridge met his glare. I agree, Senator. Let's give them the truth. The chair ordered a recess. Both men stood inches apart, neither backing down. The crowd erupted as they exited in opposite directions. Outside, the rain had stopped. Flashbulbs burst like gunfire. Lena rushed to Cruzwell's side. Sir, this is spiraling. If that memo's real, it's real. Cruzwell interrupted. But context is everything. He's twisting timelines. And if the committee sees it differently, then we give them a new headline. Across town, Butridge sat alone in his car. The driver waited for instructions. Butridge stared at his phone. A single text from an unknown number. They're setting you up. Wait for the next leak. He frowned, thumb hovering over the screen, then locked the phone without replying. In another part of the city, a man in a hoodie dropped a flash drive into an unmarked envelope and slid it under a door labeled Oversight Division. The label on the drive read, Phase 2. By midnight, producers across every network received anonymous tips, more files, more names, more evidence. And in the darkness between their offices, the war for perception became something else entirely, a fight for survival. The next morning, Washington didn't wake up. It detonated. Phase 2 leaks shake the Capitol, blared the headlines. Cable networks ran red tickers like sirens, and the files spread across social media faster than any press office could respond. What the leaks revealed wasn't just corruption, it was betrayal. Names, dates, meeting notes. Lawmakers from both sides implicated in deals that blurred the line between public duty and private gain. Inside Cruzwell's office, the air was thick with adrenaline and fear. A dozen aides spoke at once, voices overlapping. Lena Price slammed her phone onto the desk. Sir, half the committee's under investigation now. The leak's blown everything open. Cruzwell paced in silence, jaw set. And Butridge, he's denying involvement, but the files tie his deputy directly to one of the consulting firms. They've got payment logs, sir. It's bad. Cruzwell stopped pacing. Good, then it's time to finish this. Across town, Butridge sat in a secure briefing room surrounded by advisors, all of them grim-faced. Secretary, said his chief counsel, the committee's going to demand you testify again, this time under oath. They want to see your communications. Butridge exhaled slowly. Fine, let them. I've got nothing to hide. The counsel hesitated. That's the problem. The optics don't care what's true. By noon, both men were trending again. Protesters gathered outside the Capitol, some chanting clean house, while others shouted stand with Butridge. It wasn't politics anymore. It was theater. The new hearing was called within hours. The chamber looked different this time, tighter security, more cameras, a palpable sense that something irreversible was about to happen. Cruzwell arrived first, his expression cold as stone. Butridge entered moments later, tired but composed, a man bracing for war. The chair banged the gavel. This committee is convened to investigate the secondary leaks known as Phase 2. Mr. Secretary, you are under oath. Butridge stood. Understood. Cruzwell's opening statement was a blade wrapped in velvet. We sit here not as rivals, but as servants of the public trust. Yet that trust is in ashes. The files show funds rerouted to private hands, oversight ignored, warnings buried. The people deserved to know who gave the order. Butridge met his stare. No order was given to bury anything. If there were irregularities, they'll be traced and corrected. But make no mistake, Senator, this circus does nothing for the people you claim to defend. Cruzwell fired back instantly. Then you admit this administration mishandled billions. I admit that rebuilding a nation isn't tidy. Butridge said evenly, mistakes happen, but deliberate sabotage, that takes intention. The implication was clear. Cruzwell's hand tightened around the edge of the desk. Careful, Secretary. You're dancing close to defamation, and you're mistaking scrutiny for sanctity, Butridge replied. Gasps rippled through the audience. The chair called for order, but the exchange was already viral. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the flicker of emotion behind each man's eyes. Cruzwell flipped through the files dramatically. These documents, your deputy's signature, your timestamp. You can't deny involvement. Butridge leaned forward, his tone suddenly sharp. And you can't deny your own office's correspondence with the same firms. Shall I read them aloud, Senator? Cruzwell froze. The words hit harder than any accusation yet. You're bluffing. Butridge motioned to his aide, who handed him a sealed folder. This was sent anonymously this morning. It includes emails between your campaign committee and a contractor that received the same grants you're condemning. The room exploded with murmurs. The chair struggled to contain the chaos. Cruzwell's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You think you can outmaneuver me with forgeries? Butridge looked directly into the cameras. No, Senator, I think the truth just caught up. The chair called a recess, but it was too late. The clip was already streaming live, replayed in splits, screens across every network. Analysts shouted over one another. Is Cruzwell compromised? Did Butridge just expose the senator's link to the same scandal? Outside, crowds doubled in size. Protesters clashed, each side convinced the other represented corruption. Back inside the Senate lounge, Cruzwell slammed his fist onto the table. Papers scattered. Who sent that file? Find out. Lena hesitated. Sir, what if it's real? He turned slowly, fury rising. Then someone on this team betrayed me. Meanwhile, Butridge sat alone in his office, staring at the ceiling. His deputy entered quietly. You shouldn't have gone that far, sir. This could drag you down too. Butridge didn't look up. Maybe, but at least I won't drown silent. The deputy paused, then slid a folder across the desk. There's more. The whistleblower isn't who we thought. Butridge sat up. Meaning, it's someone from inside his office. The realization hit like thunder. Butridge whispered, then this isn't a leak, it's a coup. That night, in a dimly lit diner outside the city, a figure in a hooded jacket slid into a booth. Across from them sat a woman in a gray coat, Lena Price. She whispered, it's done. Both sides have the files. Now it's just a matter of who breaks first. The figure nodded silently, passing her a second flash drive. Phase 3 begins tomorrow. The next morning, the entire government woke to chaos. Servers crashed. Thousands of internal memos flooded the press, detailing decades of hidden dealings, contracts, and compromises. It was no longer about Cruzwell or Butridge. It was about the machine itself. In a studio preparing for a primetime special, a producer looked up at his team and said quietly, the country's eating itself. On Capitol Hill, both men watched from separate rooms as the footage played. Cruzwell muttered, "They wanted a war, now they've got one." Butridge, miles away, whispered almost the same words, "They wanted truth. Now they'll choke on it." Outside, the city sirens wailed again, not from protest, but from panic. And somewhere deep in a data center outside D.C., the countdown for another upload began. The Capitol dome glowed like a dying ember against the bruised sky. By morning, Washington had stopped functioning agencies offline, aides hiding behind no comment statements, and the press spinning theories faster than truth could crawl. The leaks had shattered everything. Both Cruzwell and Butridge were summoned by the Emergency Committee for a televised confrontation, the first of its kind. Public reassurance, the White House called it, but everyone knew what it really was: survival. The debate was scheduled for 8 p.m. Sharp, prime time, no filters, no aides, just two men and the reckoning between them. Inside the green room, Cruzwell stared into the mirror, straightening his tie. His eyes looked older than the day before. Lena hovered near him, phone in hand. "Sir, the networks are saying ratings could hit a record. Everyone's watching." "Good," Cruzwell muttered. "Let them watch him fall." Across the hall, Butridge sat quietly, scrolling through reports of the chaos. Transportation systems crippled by shutdowns, staff resignations, protests turning violent. His deputy spoke softly. "Sir, if you go too hard, you'll look vindictive. If you hold back, you'll look guilty." Butridge looked up, calm but weary. "There's no right move left, just the honest one." At exactly 8:00, the cameras went live. The moderator, a veteran anchor with tired eyes, began, "Good evening, America. Tonight, in the wake of national disclosures, we bring together two of the nation's most influential figures, Senator Jonathan Cruzwell and Secretary Peter Butridge. Gentlemen, the country demands clarity. Silence, the lights burned white hot." Cruzwell struck first. "Clarity, the people demand accountability. What we've seen this week is the product of reckless mismanagement under this administration. Infrastructure funds rerouted, oversight abandoned, security protocols breached, and still, Secretary Butridge insists he's clean." Butridge didn't flinch. "Senator, you're very skilled at turning failure into theater, but let's remind viewers that half those files bear signatures from your colleagues, your donors, and even your campaign's finance director." The moderator interjected, "Secretary, are you suggesting Senator Cruzwell's office was complicit?" Butridge's voice sharpened. "I'm suggesting that corruption isn't partisan, it's systemic, and Senator Cruzwell knows it because he's been feeding from the same trough." The crowd in the studio gasped. Cruzwell leaned forward, fury controlled but visible. "That's a dangerous accusation, Secretary, especially from a man whose own deputy is now under investigation for selling government contracts to private interests." Butridge countered immediately. "And yet, when that deputy came forward as a whistleblower, you were the first to smear his name. Tell me, Senator, what's more dangerous, exposing corruption or silencing it?" The moderator tried to regain order, but both men were already circling like predators. Cruzwell raised a folder. "Let's not pretend this is about integrity. These files obtained from an anonymous source show your department bypassed Senate oversight in over 50 infrastructure grants. That's criminal negligence." Butridge interrupted. He knew that whatever just fell was, "You mean the same shadow network that's been leaking selectively edited documents to make both of us look compromised? You don't serve the truth, Senator. You serve chaos." The tension was nuclear. Cameras zoomed in, broadcasting every twitch, every flicker of emotion. The nation was watching a political autopsy in real time. Cruzwell's voice dropped, cold and deliberate. Secretary, I've spent 20 years defending the integrity of this institution. You've spent 2 trying to dismantle it. Butridge shot back. I've spent 2 years trying to modernize it, against the will of men who profit from keeping it broken. A pause. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Then Cruzwell smiled a small, dangerous smile. Modernize? You mean rewire the government through private data firms and offshore accounts? That's not modernization. That's monetization. Butridge leaned in, his voice almost a whisper but dripping with fire. At least I didn't sell my votes to defense contractors to fund my re-election. The audience erupted. The moderator's voice cracked over the noise. Gentlemen, order, please. Cruzwell slammed his palm on the table. You're out of line. Butridge didn't blink, and you're out of excuses. The feed went viral instantly. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. #Cruzwell vs. Butridge. #government meltdown. #truth or treason. Commentators called it the most explosive debate in modern political history. But inside the studio, the temperature only climbed. Cruzwell suddenly reached for another folder, his trump card. Fine, you want truth. Let's talk about the file labeled Project Dawnlight, signed by you, approved by your department, and connected to a private contractor based in Singapore. Explain that to the American people. Butridge's face hardened. You don't understand what that project was, then enlighten us. It was a counter-cyber operation, Butridge said slowly, designed to expose foreign interference in federal communications, and it was classified until someone, you perhaps, leaked it. Cruzwell froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for every camera to catch it. The moderator leaned forward. Senator, is that true? Cruzwell's throat tightened. I received those files anonymously. Butridge's voice thundered. You leaked a classified counterintel program, Senator. You endangered every operative connected to it. The room descended into chaos, staff shouting, security stepping forward. The moderator's voice drowned under the uproar. For the first time, Cruzwell looked shaken. The confident lion of the Senate now looked like a man realizing he'd stepped off a cliff. Butridge's tone softened slightly. You thought you were exposing me, but you exposed all of us. A long silence hung in the air, heavy with truth and exhaustion. Finally, Cruzwell spoke quietly. Then we're both casualties of the same war. Butridge nodded. No, Senator, we're the architects. The feed cut abruptly as the network lost control of the live broadcast. But in that frozen final frame, 2 men, drenched in light and ruin. The country saw something it hadn't seen in decades, raw, unscripted accountability. Outside, Washington trembled again, this time not from scandal, but from awakening. Reporters swarmed, analysts speculated, and somewhere deep inside the Capitol, a new faction began to move quietly in the shadows, determined to capitalize on the chaos that Cruzwell and Butridge had unleashed. As the night deepened, both men retreated to their respective corners of the city. Cruzwell poured a drink, staring at the TV replaying his own downfall. Butridge sat in silence, phone buzzing with calls he didn't answer. For once, neither side had won. The truth had, and it was merciless. The city never really sleeps after a scandal like that. By dawn, helicopters thudded over Washington, and reporters camped outside every doorway that had ever opened for either man. Every headline screamed crisis in the Capitol. Every camera waited for a collapse. Inside his townhouse, Senator Cruzwell sat alone amid half-empty glasses and glowing phone screens. The news anchors were replaying last night's debate on a loop, his face frozen mid-sentence, eyes sharp with fear. Each repetition was another nail in his own coffin. Lena finally entered, voice low. Sir, the party leadership called. They're asking for your resignation before noon. He didn't look up. Did they now? After 20 years of loyalty, they send a text. Sir, they're scared. They think the leak investigation will reach the campaign donors. Cruzwell laughed dryly. It already has. They just don't want the public to know who's really funding the votes. Lena hesitated. There's something else. The Justice Department just issued a summons for both you and Secretary Butridge. You're being called to testify before the Federal Integrity Commission. He rubbed his temples. Good, let them hear everything. If I go down, I'm not going alone. Across town, Butridge stared at the Potomac from his office window, the reflection of sirens flickering on the glass. His chief aide entered quietly. Sir, the president won't defend you. They're preparing to replace you within the week. I expected that. They think you and the senator both endangered national security. Butridge turned, eyes tired but clear. Maybe we did, but we also ripped the mask off something worse. At 10 a.m., the commission hearing began. Cameras rolled again. The public had demanded transparency. The chamber was quieter this time, no applause, no shouts, just the uneasy rustle of history being written. The chairwoman addressed them sharply. Senator Cruzwell, Secretary Butridge, this committee convenes to determine whether your actions constituted a breach of federal law or an act of public service gone awry. Cruzwell's voice was hoarse. Madam Chair, I never intended to expose classified information. My only goal was to reveal misuse of taxpayer funds. Butridge spoke next. And I never intended to conceal the truth. But when truth becomes weaponized, transparency becomes treason. Gasps rippled through the room. The chairwoman frowned. Are you admitting guilt? Butridge shook his head. I'm admitting reality. Both our sides built a system so tangled in secrecy that honesty itself became a crime. Cruzwell looked at him then, not as an enemy but as a mirror. The chairwoman tapped her pen. Secretary, do you have evidence to support this claim? I do, he said, and slid a data drive across the table. Encrypted correspondence between private contractors and members of both parties, detailing how policy decisions were influenced by hidden investors. It's not one man's corruption. It's a culture. The audience gasped again. Cruzwell's pulse hammered. He hadn't expected Butridge to bring proof that wide. The chairwoman studied the drive, then addressed Cruzwell. Senator, are you listed among these names? He exhaled. Yes, but so are half the men who demanded my resignation this morning. The room broke into chaos, reporters shouting, aides whispering frantically into phones. For the first time in decades, the hearing wasn't about partisan rivalry. It was about collective guilt. Cruzwell leaned toward Butridge. You planned this. Butridge's answer was quiet. No, I finished it. Outside, protesters filled the street. Some demanding resignations, others chanting for reform. A storm rolled in, thunder cracking over the city like divine punctuation. By the afternoon, leaks from the hearing hit every network. The stock market staggered. A dozen senior officials resigned within hours. The president called an emergency address, promising a new era of accountability. Meanwhile, Cruzwell and Butridge were escorted out separate exits of the Capitol. No cuffs, no victory speeches, just exhaustion. That night, Cruzwell returned to the same dim townhouse. The TV glowed with headlines, the system exposed. His phone buzzed with messages, some threats, some thanks. He opened one from an unknown number. You did what they never could, tell the truth on record. That matters. He set the phone down and poured another drink. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like defeat. Across the river, Butridge sat alone in his office for the final time. Security clearance revoked, staff gone. He packed a single folder notes from the first day he took the job. On the last page, he'd written, Infrastructure is not steel and roads, it's trust. He left it on the desk and walked out. The following morning, newspapers called them the reluctant reformers. Congress opened a bipartisan ethics investigation. Dozens of officials faced charges, but for once the public didn't turn away. They watched, demanded, stayed angry. Weeks later, Cruzwell appeared on a small independent broadcast, unshaven but calm. Maybe this country needed to watch us fall apart to see how broken things really were, he said. When asked if he regretted it, he smiled faintly. Only that it took me so long. That clip went viral not because of scandal, but because it sounded like something rare, humility. As for Butridge, he disappeared from headlines. Rumors placed him teaching ethics somewhere far from Washington, refusing interviews. His last public words were scrawled in an open letter. If truth is treason, let history decide our guilt. The letter was framed in the Commission archives. Below it, a plaque read, "Debate ignites nations, but accountability rebuilds them." And for a fleeting moment, the Capitol seemed quieter, not because its battles had ended, but because its conscience had awakened.